Well, today we're going to look at an update on the Middle East, focus a little bit more on that than we have been in the past. But we're also going to talk about end-time stupidity. I don't know what else to call it. I could call it end-time idiocy, but then people who are idiots would feel insulted by some of the things. And I actually did look it up. I had forgotten that on the IQ scale, the lowest level is idiot. That's usually 0 to 25. Right above that is imbecile, which goes from about 26 to 50, and then moron. So if you just make sure you're calling somebody the right thing when you want to identify where they rank on that scale. And people may, idiots may actually rise to the level of morons at times, but it's still all. I call it all stupidity, and sometimes it's unforced errors, they say in sports sometimes. Well, we talk about an end-time convergence of events, and there's actually a new video out called The Coming Convergence by Brent and Kerry Miller Jr., Brent Miller Jr. and Brent Miller Sr. I had a chance to talk to him about it. You might want to look into that. The Coming Convergence. It's pretty good. We had a chance, Pam and I had a chance to meet with them in Sacramento for a morning and afternoon when we were out in California in January. And we're really on board we're on the same page on a lot of things. And they talk about this coming convergence, that everything seems to be converging at the same time. And that's the way it's going to be. And it's going to get faster and faster. As I go through things each week, I was mentioning to my wife this morning that I just feel inadequate because there are probably 6 or 7 major themes that I could make into an entire presentation just on their own. And I try to keep people on a broad view level, kind of a high overview rather than drilling into a specific thing, which I will try to do when I speak at conferences. But it's difficult. I mean, I'm doing 60 different presentations a year at least, and sometimes it's difficult to keep up. And so, as you sometimes see up here, I don't talk to people ahead of time because I'm still finishing my presentation as I'm standing here at the podium. But I want to start off today with a word of encouragement. We know that by most estimates, by most scholars, they say that the oldest book in the Bible is the book of Job. And Job's an interesting story. You know the story. Satan went to the throne room in heaven and said, what about your servant Job? He only serves you because he's successful. God, he only serves you because he's successful. And everything was taken away from Job. His family, his wealth, his health. And then he was stuck with 3 friends that didn't really give him very good advice either. But there's a passage in the middle of Job that I find very interesting. So here is the oldest book in the Bible, the oldest one committed to writing by most estimates. And in Job 19, Job gives this statement that he considers a statement of fact. Verse 23. Oh, that my words were written, oh, that they were inscribed in a book, that with an iron stylus and lead they were engraved in the rock forever. As for me, I know that my Redeemer lives, and at the last he will take his stand on the earth. Even after my skin is destroyed, yet from my flesh I shall see God, whom I myself shall behold, and whom my eyes will see, and not another. My heart faints within me. Now, you can pick up a few things from what Job said there. One of the things is Job had an eschatology. He knew what it was going to be like at the end. He knew that there was a certainty that his Redeemer would always live. And he knew, even though he would die and rot away in his body, he would be resurrected and see God someday. everybody has an eschatology. And I've contended for a long time that if I can pretty much tell when people start talking about things that they consider to be important in the life of a Christian, you can get a pretty good grip on their eschatology. And it governs a lot of what they say and do and think as a Christian. A lot of people will dismiss it, that eschatology isn't important, but they have by saying they don't have much of an eschatology, they have an eschatology. And I think it's much more important in the life of the Christian than most people want to admit. And so there was Job looking down the corridors of time, and he knew that at the end, when this millennial kingdom comes, that his Redeemer would stand on the earth. It's an amazing prophecy. It should be one that gives all of us great hope. I don't have much hope for the world. Look, I still get up and go to work every day. But I know that there are things coming upon the earth that I think are going to happen in my lifetime that I'm going to have to deal with. And they may not be that pleasant. But I know that my Redeemer lives. And that even if I die, I'll be resurrected again. You know, when Abraham, it tells us in Hebrews, when Abraham took his son Isaac up to Mount Moriah to sacrifice him, his great hope was that Isaac would be resurrected. Talks about that in Hebrews. So that is always our hope, is that resurrection. Now, some might miss out on the resurrection, but they will still have the same effect as the resurrection because they'll be changed if they're here and alive at the rapture. So keep that in mind. I was looking, so let's just look at some of the things that are going on that are kind of crazy, sometimes stupid, and we'll look at the Middle East. This is a map that was put out of the dams in the United States that are at high risk of failure, which is encouraging. This is the, it's all right there on, can I say the dam map? Am I allowed to say that? No in on that one. Don't put a letter in my mouth. It's not very encouraging. I hope nobody's driving through Atlanta, too. Did you see the pictures of that fire and the collapse? You know, we had that happen on 270 while Pam and I were out in California. And they were able to get that fixed pretty quickly, but that was only like a couple lanes, 3 lanes wide, maybe, that bridge. It was not this 16 lanes. I mean, that was a pretty awesome fire. And so we're going down south in a few months, and 2 months, and I'm pretty sure, I don't know when they'll get that done, but I'm pretty sure I'm going to avoid Atlanta if I can. And Pam and I just drove on that road just last winter, about a year ago. Well, this was the thing from Time magazine last week. Their cover is Truth Dead. And when you look around and you watch the media and all these things, you have to say, I think they might be right for the most part, because truth is pretty much the last thing that a lot of people are concerned with. I'm concerned about it. Speaking of eschatology, even our good friend Al Gore has an eschatology. And he was on PBS a couple weeks ago, and here's what he had to say.
What is your take on the man the president chose to head the Environmental Protection Agency, Scott Pruitt, who, by the way, just last week said he doesn't agree that carbon dioxide is a primary contributor to climate change?
And that's a perfect example of the problem that I'm describing in the assault on reason. But again, at some point, a false belief collides with physical reality.
Okay, now see that's called irony. Okay. We have an English teacher here. She can correct me if I'm wrong.
Every night on the television news now, a nature hike through the book of Revelation. These climate-related extreme weather events have convinced the vast majority of people that the scientists have been right for a long time. We have to address this. But putting someone in the EPA who denies even the most basic scientific truth about this, you know, the old cliches are, you could say the earth is flat, but it doesn't mean you're going to fall off the edge.
Well, and I'm glad that they trot out this the high priest of climate change every so often to set everybody straight, since he has the source of all truth. But he has an eschatology, you know, because he says that every night on the news it's like a walk through the book of Revelation. So maybe, you know, pray that he continues to read the book of Revelation and he might learn something. And here's my concern that I have a lot of times with the way this is approached in both the secular and also in the Christian community on the eschatological side. A lot of times, things that happen in the Bible, they're miraculous events. But people will spend a tremendous amount of time in the Christian community explaining it away that, you know, this is what happened. Now, I'm concerned about that because it takes the power of God out of the equation. So the long day of Joshua becomes an explanation about some physical events, some kind of orbits of the planets and that type of thing that were happening. And so I look at it this way. God can override anything. He's sovereign. He's all power. He's omnipotent. And it is possible that sometimes these planetary alignments happen at a specific time so that when this event is happening, it's proof that God created and designed everything so that he wound it up so that when this event happened, everything would turn out the right way using natural phenomena. But I object to always ascribing things to natural occurring phenomena because I think that takes the miraculous nature of God out of the equation. And what's happening with people like Al Gore is they're tools of the devil. Because the devil doesn't want anybody to believe that God is intervening in human history. And so they turn it into, well, this is all caused by man. And we can control everything. We can fix everything. And that's not true. Sometimes we can't even keep a bridge in Atlanta from collapsing. And yet they act like we can control the weather and the climate and everything. And we can't. Now, there are people that think they can, and they're going to try. But it seems like every time we hear people like they're in charge of everything, it only proves that there are people that want to be in charge of everything, but they're not very good at it. You know, I know that there are people that want to put into place a one world government. And I believe they've been conspiring and working towards this for a long time. Even one of the guys who pushed it, David Rockefeller, died a week or so ago at the age of 101. He started the Trilateral Commission and other organizations to try to bring about this new world order, this one world government. And he lived to 101 and he failed. And he'll go to his grave as poor as any one of us will go to our graves at some point. You can go to his grandfather's grave up at Lakeview Cemetery in Cleveland Heights. And you know that underneath that dirt there is the decaying, rotting body of probably the richest man who ever lived. But he's just a decaying, rotting body now. He doesn't have anything with him. But people try to think that they're in control, and that's where bad eschatology gets you into trouble. This is the new Google Doodle that somebody did up, and you can see it's kind of a play on the coexist thing. And you see the kind of the hand signs back there, sort of sometimes the satanic hand signs that are made. And I would make them, but to show you which they're in the shadows there. But people would accuse me of being, one of the Illuminati or a Freemason. Which, and by the way, if you're going to get on our YouTube channel and make those accusations, don't. Okay? Because you'll be deleted and blocked immediately. Because it's just stupidity on your part. It's not. Don't reduce things to that kind of analysis. That's as shallow analysis as you can come. It's kind of a pet peeve of mine. And there were people on there doing it this week again. And it's just, I don't even know where a Masonic lodge is, okay? Okay. And so you can see that this is where it's going. North Carolina caved in and repealed their bathroom bill this week. So they everybody said the NCAA and the ACC, they won't bring their championships there, and the NFL won't bring them there, and they canceled the NBA All-Star game last year because the legislators in North Carolina, a majority of them thought, if you're born a male, you should go to a male bathroom. And if you're born a female, you should go to a female bathroom. But the enlightened left thinks that that's just discriminatory. That's stupid. And by doing that, they show where they are on that intelligence scale. And they're denying physical reality. So the reaction of the LGBT community, and by the way, it's not actually supposed to be LGBTQ anymore. This week they came out and said, no, that by just using a B, that was not sufficiently nuanced, so now you have to put a plus after the B. And there's also some other letters that are added on the end with another plus, which I don't think means the plus here, but it's just, it's end time stupidity. I mean, it proves my point. And the LGBT community thought that the repeal of the bill was not sufficient. They're never happy, okay? Because they're the high priest and priestesses and priestesses plus of what is true. GLAAD, G-L-A-A-D, it's a gay rights organization, talks about accelerating acceptance 2017. There's a quote from this survey that they just published the other day. Young people today are more accepting of LGBTQ. See, they're not even up to date. It's LGB plus TQ. They don't even get their own stuff right. People than ever before. And as acceptance has grown in this country, so too has the number of young people who describe themselves as LGBTQ. And so they did a survey. And the results are rather stunning. The percentage of people who identify as LGBTQ by age group is this. They say that those people constitute 12% of the total population. Now, I had a conversation with somebody yesterday like, well, this transgender thing is less than 0.1% of the population. I'm going to tell you right now, I don't think that's true anymore. As this has become accepted, and as we move closer to the end times and this Romans 1 judgment that God has talked about comes into play, it's a much higher percentage. This survey that GLAAD did shows that 12% of the total population applies that way. And but look at the 72%, 72 and over, it's 5%. But look at 18 to 34-year-old people, 20% identify as one of those classifications. And I think, I'm absent a massive revival, I think that number is only going to grow. Also, if you look down here at the bottom of the page, I'm not sure I understand how this breaks down. sexual orientation and gender identity by age group. So they have 3 categories down there at the bottom, and they're 8%, 4%, and 8%, and you can blow that up and look at it on your own. But again, there are people. Well, the categories are these. The dark blue is cisgender, not strictly heterosexual. Then the other is non-cisgender, strictly heterosexual. And then the light blue is non-cisgender, not strictly heterosexual. And I have to tell you, I'm not enlightened enough I'm not sure what they're talking about. I'm sorry, I'm just not. In fact, if I was in England right now, somebody sent me this morning or last night, that if you use he, she, mankind, man-made in a paper that you write in school in England, you get downgraded for using those words. So now the language has changed, and so they change it to this, and I can't figure it out. It's sort of beyond my binary way of looking at things. And okay. In one good news, the Senate did vote, Mike Pence casting the deciding vote, since it was 50-50, to limit the funds that states can limit funds provided given to abortion providers until it's appealed, till that is the subject of a lawsuit in the Ninth Circuit, and then one of those idiot judges, I do mean idiot judges there, will say, no, you can't do that, because it hurts people's feelings if you do that. And so they'll give money to Planned Parenthood on the ostensible purpose that Planned Parenthood will use it for mammograms. And then you call up any Planned Parenthood in the country and ask them, when can I schedule my wife, or I guess yourself, for a mammogram, and they don't have any. They don't do it. I've got pictures of Cecile Richards talking about it in speeches, and then when she's asked under oath of Congress at a congressional hearing, she says, well, we don't do that. So there goes the truth. And I only put up this page from the Washington Times the other day because to show you that when I'm looking at things, I look through a lot of different papers and sources and materials. And this was just one page from the Washington Times the other day, and I probably could have talked the whole hour just about what was on the front page. Because remember the left, they had this women's march, and then they had the follow-up. Well, one of the organizers of this was a person who had been convicted of terrorism in Israel named Oda. She came to the United States. She lied on her immigration papers. Oops. Oh, well, that's okay, though. You're allowed to lie to get into the country because Judge Watson said in Hawaii says, you really are not allowed to look into that, whether you've been convicted of Islamic terrorism. To which I would say it's elementary, Judge Watson, to figure this out. So she pled guilty to being an illegal immigrant, did a plea agreement, and now the left is lionizing what a great person she was. She helped kill Jews, and the left doesn't care. This is insanity. Now, at the risk, I didn't clear this with my editor in the back. In 2011, Linda Saussure, who is the Hamas-connected women's rights advocate who helped organize the Women's March the day after the inauguration, she tweeted this, and it's not a bad word, it's an anatomical word, but so Bridget Gabriel and Ayan Hirsi Ali. She's asking for an blank whipping. I wish I could take their you-know-what away. They don't deserve to be women. This is a Muslim woman using that language to diss Ayaan Hirsi Ali, who herself is a victim of female genital mutilation growing up in an Islamic country. And this lady is okay to lead these women's marches. The connection between the left and Islam is growing more and more clear every day. Let's see. Now this. Access Islam. It was reported this week that schools, and this has been running around different reports, you never see it on the media. You'll see it on Christian Action Network. You'll see it on Act for America website. There are lesson plans that schools have implemented to teach Islam to children in the United States of America in public schools. Now look, when I grew up, even after the decision banning prayer and reading the Bible in the school I went to in North Canton, Ohio, we still had devotions every morning. And we still had prayer. Now you had to be careful because there was a kid in 6th grade, I remember, he snuck a book in and he convinced the teacher to why don't we use this book for devotions? So I'm 11 years old, so I took it home and because it was my turn. And his name began with an F and there were a couple G's. So there was 3 days that they'd read this book. And I took it home to read, and I actually prepared for my part in morning devotions in 6th grade. And I'm reading this book, and it's talking about there's only 144,000 people in heaven. Jesus really, wasn't the Son of God. And so I took it to my dad, who is, as you know, a pastor. I said, Dad, this doesn't seem right. And it had weird things about creation, long, 1,000-year days of creation and that type of thing, if I recall. It was an orange book, I remember. And so the next morning, I went to do my part in devotions, and my dad went along and told the teacher, you're not going to use that book in my kid's class anymore. To which the teacher agreed, and so we actually read from the Bible. And I remember doing a report on Buddhism or Confucianism when I was in high school, when we were studying sort of world cultures and world religions. But this is different. These are lesson plans made up by the Muslim Brotherhood and its affiliates to indoctrinate your kids into the beauties of Islam. And as I researched this, you can see the lesson plans here. Lesson plan 2, the 5 pillars of Islam. The foundations of Islamic religious practices, the 5 pillars. These basic duties, belief, worship, fasting, almsgiving, and pilgrimage, guide Muslims in their daily life. Lesson 2, Salat, prayer in Muslim life. Lesson plan 4, Ramadan observance. And if you don't think this is it's not embedded in our educational culture now, you're naive, because even churches are doing these Ramadan observances. And pastors of even mega churches are going to mosques to celebrate Ramadan with imams in their local community. There's a guy out in Sacramento who's done it. I have pictures and testimony from the imam when he did it a few years ago. So, what do you think is going to happen to the kids? What you find out when you drill through this Access Islam, a lot of it comes from a PBS special that was done on Islam that was very complimentary, and it really whitewashed the history of Islam. And it's funded by the United States Department of Education and NPR. So your tax dollars are pushing this off to the kids. And then it gives you a timeline here. You see 560 to 661, life of Muhammad. He actually died before 660. I think he died about 632. So it's not even factually correct. And then Islam in America, 1530 to 2006. There wasn't much around here in 1530. The Jamestown settlement was 1607, right? Plymouth was 1620. But that doesn't, those facts don't matter. Actually, there's a great graphic on YouTube. You can look it up. I should have put it on here. Slave ships from Africa, about a third of them, 30% of them believe, 20 to 30% believed to be Muslim, and how they came to America. And it's a terrible history. But the interesting that you find is that of the slave ships that they have historically sailed across the Atlantic, the smallest percentage of them came to the United States. Most of them went to the Caribbean and South America. I mean, you need to look at this. Maybe I'll try to dig that out and put it in a presentation. So, I mean, their history's all messed up. And interesting, they use the term the modern era of Islam. I think that's kind of a interesting thing since they all want to go back to the 8th century. So they have these things, they have these lesson plans, they have these videos. And then they look at, this is what the kids are taught in school, in public school. A lot of public schools using this. Listen to this first paragraph, God. For Muslims, God is unique and without equal. They attempt to think and talk about God without either making him into a thing or a projection of the human self. The Quran avoids this by constantly shifting pronouns to discourage believers from inadvertently reifying God and creating any physical image of him. It's also very confusing. This paragraph, God is known in Arabic as Allah to distinguish him from Ilah, which would refer to any of the gods once worshipped in Arabia. Just as one might say in English that the French or Germans worship God, not Dio or God, so one should probably say that Muslims worship God, not Allah, which is simply the word for God in the Arabic language. Giving a different name to the one God worshipped by the followers of Muhammad erroneously implies that their God is different from the one God worshipped by Jews or Christians. Listen, read large chunks of the Quran. That God is a different God. That Jesus is a different Jesus. That Mary is a different Mary. It's not the same, but you see how they twist it and confuse people. And then here's a lesson plan, the origin and spread of Islam. And the only thing that I will tell you is, Muhammad had this, and he had some visions, and he was called, and although he enjoyed success in business, he cared about spiritual matters. He often spent time at prayer and meditation in the mountains around Mecca. He was concerned about the effects of wealth and the worship of idols on his city. He was only concerned about wealth, I think, because he didn't have all of it. In about 610, Muhammad went to meditate in a cave in the mountains. There, according to Islamic teachings, Muhammad received the call to be a prophet or messenger of Allah. Muhammad later described the remarkable events of that night. He told of being visited by the angel Gabriel, who brought revelations or revealed teachings from God. Gabriel told Muhammad, "You are the messenger of God." According to Islamic tradition, at first Muhammad feared that he might be going mad. Why? Because he was under demonic attack. That's where this came from. Well, anyway. There, Muhammad met and prayed with earlier prophets, such as Muhammad, Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. And I know this. Why? Because this is what the story that Barack Obama referred to on June 4th, 2009, when he gave that speech that kind of unwound the Arab world in Cairo at Al-Azhar University. Then the horse guided Muhammad through the 7 levels of heaven, and Muhammad met God. To this day, Jerusalem is a holy city for the Muslims. It's just one little fact. Jerusalem is never mentioned in the Quran, ever. It's mentioned hundreds of times in the Bible. Then it talked about the spread of Islam, and you see how it spread. And when you read this, you think that it's spread by, sort of like Mormons going around to houses to share their faith. Slowly, the lands of Muslim empire took on more elements of Arab culture. They did. You know why? Because if you didn't do it, you got killed. Muslims introduced the Arabic language. Along with Islam, acceptance of Arabic helped unite the diverse people of the empire. In addition, Arabs took over as top officials. People bought goods with new Arab coins. What they don't tell you is this. In that history, Islam killed over 270 million people. 270 million people. Over 80 million killed by Islam in India alone. They make Mao and Stalin look like choir boys. They don't say that. Look at what they say. The Muslim Empire continued to expand. The Umayyad Caliph sent armies into Central. Oh, they sent armies. Now we're getting a little bit of the truth. Muslim armies began their conquest of present-day Spain. At the Battle of Tours, they were turned back. But they present it like no big deal. They just kind of proselytized their way with their armies across North Africa up into Europe, all the way even to the gates of Vienna in Austria. Now, what's interesting is when you're digging on these websites and you find these lesson plans, you also find this stuff from the National Association of School Psychologists about, I know, it's crazy, right? I guess that's why it's connected with the psychologists. And they talk about stopping bullying. And of course, at the end, the last sentence, they report hate crimes to law enforcement, although I'm not sure we have hate crimes in some respects, and the Southern Poverty Law Center, the high priestesses of priests and priestesses of hate. The Southern Poverty Law Center is itself a hate group. They identify some groups that are hate, but they identify a lot of Christians that they don't like either. And then there's these videos, empower tools that they have. And it says, there's a site called Go Noodle. So I created my own noodle to go through this. It's interesting. The Southern Poverty Law Center, this week there's a professor from Drexel who said that when he saw somebody offer their first class seat on a flight to a military person, he wanted to throw up. And he went and he said, well, a lot of these websites that attack Islam and everything, they're not based on academic research. You have to have rigorous peer-reviewed academic research in order to be believed. Okay, so this guy believes that's what he believes is how truth is set up. And it's the same way Al Gore believes truth is set up with regard to climate change. You have to get peer-reviewed. And if you don't agree with the company line, you don't get approved. Therefore, it's not true. But then this professor, in his interview with Tucker Carlson, he identifies a group that you can trust as the Southern Poverty Law Center, which bases none of their stuff on academic peer-reviewed research. In time, stupidity. So then it goes on to empower tools and this school psychologist, to which I don't think I had a school psychologist when I was a kid growing up. That's probably why I'm so messed up. If I had a problem, Johnny, go out in the hall. I spent a lot of time in the hall. I took a book out there and read, and it was more interesting. So they bring this guy in on one of the noodle things, and it's about, this is expanded and contract to show how you should breathe. Breathe. And you get to the end of the video, and guess what? The School Yoga Project. This is what's being pushed on your kids. End time stupidity. It exists at the highest levels of our government. Now listen, I have respect for this guy, but I don't know what he's thinking. This is Secretary of Defense Mattis went to England this week, and he said this.
It's good to be standing beside you, especially at this time and place, soon after a senseless murder killed citizens of both our countries.
Language is important. I'm a lawyer. You put the wrong things in a contract, you can have bad things happen down the road. This was a terrorist attack. Why is our Secretary of Defense calling this a senseless murder? It was an Islamic terrorist attack, Secretary Mattis. Get that through your head. I know you think that if you don't call it what it is, that everything will be fine, but all you people have been calling it not what it is for a long time, and it hasn't gotten better. It's getting worse. Get over it. Deal with the problem. Can you imagine if I had a confirmation hearing in the Senate for anything, for janitor at the Homeland Security? They'd play this tape and it would be, I'd probably be marched out of there in leg irons. I'd look like Hannibal Lecter being wheeled out of that Senate room. But truth is truth. Here's this guy, he went to fight for ISIS, and he came back to Belgium. And I think he was complicit in that terror attack that occurred just a year ago. And he's allowed to remain. And there are hundreds of these guys all over Europe. 400 to 800 in England alone that they've let come back. They're surveilling 24 hours a day over 3,000 people of a particular religion in England right now. It's completely, and it's hurting their law enforcement ability to go out, because it takes about 2 to 3 dozen people to monitor one person at that level. But let's just bring more back. Let's lionize this lady who killed Jewish people. And then in the New York Times today, on the editorial page, why is this hate different from all other hate? And the lady, what she tries to do is she tries to pin all the anti-Semitic attacks on President Trump and his administration. As many occurred under Barack Obama, and this lady never opened her mouth. So shut your mouth. This is the way the left works. And even though it's come out that it was left-wing people that did all of these harassing calls to Jewish centers, a Jewish American kid in Israel and an African American kid here is trying to impress his girlfriend. And by the way, if your girlfriend's impressed by you calling in terrorist attacks and bomb threats, you need a new girlfriend. She's bad news. But see, the truth doesn't matter to these people. So she may have written this before all the truth came out about who was causing these phone-in bomb threats. But the truth doesn't matter to her. It doesn't matter to Congressman Schiff, that lying creep from California, about all of the Russian influence and the investigations and stuff, who comes out and talks to the press and then can criticize Nunes for talking to the press. Okay, so there is a bright light. I don't have time to play the whole thing. You can go to the APAC YouTube channel and you can hear this lady talk, who is, I think, someone who's starting to speak the truth.
Basically what it comes down to is I'm not there to play. And what I wanted to make sure of was that the United States started leading again. And leading isn't saying and doing things when it's comfortable. Leading's saying and doing things when it's not comfortable. So the goal was have the backs of our allies. Never again do what we saw happen with Resolution 2334 and make anyone question our support. When Resolution 2334 happened, and the U.S. abstained, the entire country felt a kick in the gut. We had just done something that showed the United States at its weakest point ever. Never do we not have the backs of our friends. We don't have a greater friend than Israel. And to see that happen was not only embarrassing, it was hurtful. And so what I can tell you is everyone at the United Nations is scared to talk to me about Resolution 2334. And I wanted them to know that, look, that happened, but it will never happen again.
I want to play a clip here. I hope I can find it.
We have a lot of things to talk about. There are a lot of threats to peace and security. But you're not going to take our #1 Democratic friend in the Middle East and beat up on them. And I think what you're seeing is they're all backing up a little bit. The Israel bashing is not as loud. They didn't know exactly what I meant outside of giving the speech, so we showed them. So when they decided to try and put a Palestinian in one of the highest positions that had ever been given at the UN, we said no. And we had him booted out. That doesn't mean he wasn't a nice man. That doesn't mean he wasn't good to America. What it means is until the Palestinian Authority comes to the table, until the UN responds the way they're supposed to, there are no freebies for the Palestinian Authority anymore. So then they tested us again. And a ridiculous report, the Falk report, came out. I don't know who the guy is or what he's about, but he's got serious problems. Goes and compares Israel to an apartheid state. So the first thing we do is we call the Secretary General and say, this is absolutely ridiculous. You have to pull it. The Secretary General immediately pulled the report. And then the director has now resigned. Last thing. So for anyone that says you can't get anything done at the UN, they need to know there's a new sheriff in town.
I missed the clip. Here's what she said. You can look it up on the APAC and you can read the transcript. She said, I wear heels. They're not a fashion statement. You do this and I'm going to kick you with my heels. So that's kind of refreshing. So it's about 15 minutes long, but she only talks about half the time because of the applause. And so that's encouraging. And, you know, the interesting thing is you heard about this here in the Prophecy Update. You read this stuff in the mainstream media on NBC Nightly News and stuff like that? No. You can dig it out in the Jerusalem Post and Caroline Glick's columns. Okay, let's talk about the Middle East here. By the way, this is a picture of some of the, if you can go on and there's these YouTube channels called War Explosions, and this one, I forget what it's called. They're actually, what's going on in Syria, you're filming it in high def. And ISIS is filming stuff, they're, suicide bombers with high definition drones. And they're even highlighting in the video their target area. They put it in red. And this war's different now. There's no privacy anywhere. And you can see this is in East Damascus. It's pretty much destroyed. We always talk about Isaiah 17. the destruction of Damascus. And it's like, at this point, all they got to do is focus on the western half, because it's a mess out there. And if you watch this, you would see even more, but I got to move on. So the interesting thing in the Middle East, so we're going to talk about sort of the alignment of parties for Ezekiel 38, 39, which includes a country from the north. A lot of people think it's Russia, Turkey, Iran, Libya, how that alignment is coming into fruition. And then some things to the security of Israel. And we're going to go till about a quarter after, so if you have to leave, you have to get up. So this is from the Institute of Study of War, and it shows areas where Russian influence has increased. So it shows Iran influencing Syria. It shows Turkey coming in, Iraq, Egypt, and then also Libya. Over here, this report was in, I think, the New York Times. Russia's intervention in Libya would realign the Eastern Mediterranean. Because you see, at least one interpretation, one of the most probably the most accepted interpretation of Ezekiel 38, 39 is that Russia will lead a coalition of Muslim countries, based on how they are today, into the Middle East to attack Israel. And one of those is Libya. So Libya's been in kind of meltdown, and now Russia's influencing Libya, intervening in Libya to get it into the orbit. They've got Syria, Iran's there, Persia's there, and we'll see later that Turkey's coming into place. But this week there was a meeting. Here is Rouhani, the president of Iran, going to the Kremlin in Moscow to meet with Vladimir Putin. And you learn some things like this. They like chintzy furniture at the Kremlin. On Fixer Upper, that stuff's going in the chipper. Chip's taking it to the chipper. And Putin's not a very big guy, because those, and so neither is Rouhani. And that's interesting. So here they are meeting to discuss their alliance. The other guy I want to spend a little time on is Erdogan in Turkey. Now, listen, I mentioned this article a little bit before that I'm going to get to in just a minute. That's not the slide. This article is about the attack on Mosul. They're trying to take Mosul back. They've gone through East Mosul. People have been disrupted. There's no electricity. There's no water. People aren't safe. ISIS fighters are still embedded, and now they've moved into West Mosul, which is a very densely populated area. And it's not going very well. They've stopped the attacks for now to try to take it back. The ISIS guys go up on the roof of a building. They herd a bunch of people into the lower floors. They go up on the roof of the building, act like snipers, and then we attack the building with bombs and that type of thing. And guess what? Now we're being accused of killing hundreds of civilians and maiming even more from these attacks. And it's just not going well. Foreign policy towards this, they've come to the fact that much of the city's infrastructure, notably water and electricity networks, is in ruins. Women and children have resorted to hauling carts with water containers to distribution points, but even then residents have to use it sparingly. We get enough for drinking and cooking, but there is not much left for washing, one resident told me. More than 2 months after the area in East Mosul was recaptured, there is virtually no functioning medical facility in eastern Mosul. A few small clinics provide the most rudimentary primary care, hardly sufficient for a war zone. And here are the maps. Now, one thing that's interesting on the map that I'm going to talk about in just a minute, you see the border for Turkey up there at the top left-hand corner? And then below that, you see Syria. Then over here to the right, you see Iraq. Last October, Erdogan gave a couple of speeches where he talked about that the border of Turkey should not stop up here, that Ataturk, when he agreed to the Treaty of Lausanne in about 1924, he agreed to that border, but it should be down here. It should be below Aleppo, and it should come all the way down over here into essentially this part here, which puts it pretty close to Baghdad. That's what Erdogan thinks Turkey's border should be. because he wants to reinvigorate the caliphate. And here he is 3 weeks ago in the same chintzy furniture room at the Kremlin. I'm sure it's all gold, but maybe it's not. It doesn't look comfortable to me. And he has given speech. And so here is this article. One of the speeches he's given, you can see sort of the video of it. Turkey new maps are reclaiming the Ottoman Empire. And so Erdogan is being very aggressive in the way he's going out saying that the Turkish country should be bigger than it really is. And they want to reclaim at least part of the Ottoman Empire. This article says this: in the past few weeks, a conflict between Ankara and Baghdad over Turkey's role in the liberation of Mosul has precipitated an alarming burst of Turkey irredentism, which means that they want to reclaim things that they used to have when that was the Ottoman Empire. On two separate occasions, President Erdogan criticized the Treaty of Lausanne, which created the borders of modern Turkey, for leaving the country too small. The specific history behind the borders they envision provides the first indication of what's new and what isn't about Erdogan's brand of nationalism. Now, this is right after he's making these speeches, right after he's put back this coup attempt. He's arrested a lot of people, journalists, teachers, government people. 200,000, over 200,000 people arrested and imprisoned in Turkey. They've had to let bad criminals go to get all the political prisoners in place. These maps purport to show the borders laid out in Turkey's National Pact, a document Erdogan recently suggested the Prime Minister of Iraq should read to understand his country's interest in Mosul. Signed in 1920 after the Ottoman Empire's defeat in World War I, the National Pact identified those parts of the empire that the government was prepared to fight for. Specifically, it claimed that those territories that were still held by the Ottoman army in October 1918, at the end of World War I, when Constantinople signed an armistice with the Allied powers. On Turkey's southern border, this line ran from north of Aleppo in what is now Syria to Kirkuk in what is now is Iraq. And it goes all the way down almost to Latakia, where Russia has put this base. So there's this tremendous tension there between Turkey, Iran, Russia, what we pretend is a country called Syria. It's just a little strip of land along the Mediterranean now, highly populated, but it's not much. It's not what Greater Syria used to be. When the Allies made it clear they planned to leave the empire with a lot less than it held in 1918, it led to renewed fighting in which troops under Mustafa Kemal Ataturk defeated European forces to establish Turkey as it exists today. For the better part of the past century, Turkey's official history lauded Ataturk for essentially realizing the borders envisioned by the National Pact, minus Mosul, of course, is recognized with the, for essentially, well, anyway, Ataturk recognized those borders. Erdogan, by contrast, has given voice to an alternative narrative in which Ataturk's willingness in the Treaty of Lausanne to abandon territories such as Mosul and the now Greek islands in the Aegean. Erdogan in these speeches has said, we're entitled to Thessalonica. We're entitled to Crimea. We're entitled to Batumi, which is a city on the Black Sea in Georgia. He made that speech at Batumi, by the way. The suggestion against all evidence is that better statesmen, or perhaps a more patriotic one, could have gotten more. Now, this is a sea change in Turkish politics because Ataturk is highly revered for what he did in establishing modern Turkey and limiting the influence of Islam in that country, making it more secular. And he's attacking you go to Turkey today and you criticize Ataturk, you're likely to get arrested and thrown in jail. But here's Erdogan, he's going out and do it. So Erdogan's going into Syria and he's trying to keep the PKK, which is the Kurdish party, at bay. He's got other alternatives. And it makes this whole situation very complicated because Iraq doesn't trust Turkey, so they want the Kurds to kind of move over more into Syria, more into southern Turkey. Erdogan wants to move them back. Iran doesn't want to move back because they have their own Kurdish problem in the north of their country. And what you have is total chaos over there. So, and he's trying to appeal to his Arab brothers and sisters. Now, this article from the Washington Post in January, right around the time of the inauguration, the Turkish parliament, on January 21, the Turkish parliament approved a constitutional amendment that would change the current system of government from parliamentary to presidential. These changes will now go to a popular referendum, which is set for April 16th, coming in the aftermath of a failed coup attempt in the midst of a massive crackdown on independent civil society. These proposed amendments would fundamentally change Turkey's political system. The proposed changes are so profound that if passed, they will amount to a total regime change, not just a change in the system of government. Erdogan's de facto one-man rule will be codified into what can only be described as a sultanistic regime, unprecedented in Turkey or anywhere else in the democratic world. In fact, some people have described it as the most oppressive regime in Europe since Adolf Hitler. The comparison is not without reason. Power would be severely concentrated on the presidency with almost no checks and balances. Some Turks worry that the new constitution may even allow him to appoint his sons and sons-in-laws as vice presidents and even successors. The passage of the amendment would crown Erdogan's long-standing efforts to consolidate power in a presidential system and could strike a mortal blow to Turkey's once flourishing democracy. Listen, folks, it's over for democracy in Turkey right now. A new guy is in charge who wants to be the caliph in the Middle East. And I do think it plays into some of the end-time prophetic scenarios. I think it's very significant. He'll be allowed to issue presidential decrees that can only be overruled by an absolute majority of the Turkish parliament. He can suspend parliament. He can't be tried for any crimes that he commits unless 2/3 of the people in parliament, most of which will be beholden to him, as the one-party system that's going to be in place in Turkey, he will be the ultimate supreme ruler of Turkey. He even gets to appoint most of the people to the Supreme Court that would hear any challenges to his authority. By the way, there's some judges we have. Go over there. You do the work of your masters, so just leave. If you want the names, I'll provide a list later. And so here's Erdogan. Now he's talking about, so in early March, he started dissing Germany at these rallies. You know, they're having this vote in Germany. Well, Germany's going to have elections soon, but in the Netherlands didn't want a Turkish foreign minister to come in to rally the Turkish people that live in the Netherlands. Close to 1 million, I guess, maybe 500,000 to 1 million. There are several million, at least, Turks that live in Europe, and they're not assimilating well. So Erdogan says, "You won't let my guy come in and talk to you. You're Nazis." So this Nazis is calling these people Nazis, and I mean, he really is a stormtrooper. And then the foreign minister came out and said, now that the election in the Netherlands is over, when you look at the many parties, you see there's no difference between the Social Democrats and fascist Geert Wilders. All have the same mentality. Where will you go? Where are you taking Europe? You have begun to collapse Europe. You are dragging Europe into the abyss. Holy wars will soon begin in Europe. And then Erdogan came out in a speech around the time of the elections, and he agreed with them. You're a bunch of Nazis. You're fascists. And so this is very important to watch what's happening with Turkey. The UN Human Rights Council, they came out, I mentioned this a week or so ago. They have issued 5 resolutions. Here's the one on Golan against Israel. And the British guy, he came in. It just essentially says, Israel, you got to get out of the Golan Heights. And here's the British guy talking. Can you turn that up? Well, this is the quote I read last week. This is the guy actually saying it. So go put this one on.
Today. This is not acceptable.
Here we go.
The terrorism facing Israel. According to the Quartet's report last year, there were 250 terrorist attacks leading to the deaths of 30 Israelis. Yet neither terrorism nor incitement was a focus for today. This is not acceptable. Israel is a population of 8 million, in a world of 7 billion. Yet since its foundation, the Council has adopted 135 country-specific resolutions, 68 of which were against Israel.
And if you do the math, that's one more than half being against Israel. With all the tyrants in the world, Israel gets the focus more than half the time at the UN Human Rights Council. There was an Arab summit. They talked about the thing that came out of that was we want a Palestinian state. Oh, yeah, the Arab world, it's melting down and we have a lot of problems, but we want a Palestinian state because that'll solve all of our problems. It's more the end time. I put this beyond end time stupidity. This is end time evil that they're talking about. That's what they focus on. There was a Gulf News had a editorial the other day, Arab Summit stern messages to Israel and Iran. You can look that up on the internet and find Gulf News editorial was on March 31st or April 1st. And it wasn't a joke, by the way. Israel wants to approve a new West Bank settlement. And by the way, there's an article that I read this week, and it said things you should never use in your language. Don't call them Palestinians, call them Arabs, don't call it West Bank, call it Judea and Samaria. Because when you look it up, what you find is that that's what the UN did when they were writing up the partition plan in 1947. They didn't really call it Palestine. They didn't call it the West Bank. They didn't call it that. In connection with this, a new survey. What happened? Did I kick something? Hang on here. Did I bump it? Nope. Okay. We need to check that cable probably because I was having trouble with it this morning. We set up and tear down each week. And I'm taking that 2 minutes. A timeout. Okay, so there's a survey. You can find it at JCPA, Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs. Great website, a lot of good information. Just came out, and you can also find it on other websites. They surveyed Jewish people. They surveyed people in Israel. What do you want to do? And they showed that from December 2003, support for the Clinton parameters, the demilitarized Palestinian state, this is essentially Oslo, without settlement blocks, full Palestinian security control of the West Bank, Jerusalem divided in the capital of both states, the Temple Mount in the hands of Palestinians, while Israel receives the Western Wall. So in December 2003, only 42, less than half of people in Israel supported that. Now, 42% supported that. Then it rose in January 2005. Then we had the Lebanon war and some problems with the total disengagement from Gaza, and support started to fall. And now, March 2017, that support has fallen to 29%. Only 29% support that. See the bottom line there, transferring the Temple Mount to the Palestinians. 10% agree with that. 83% oppose it. So the numbers are changing. So the world, everybody still talks, even our State Department, even Nikki Haley's talking about a two-state solution and how this division can be made. And the majority of people in Israel, they don't believe it anymore. That's why I think that it may be forced on them at some point. And they'll do what they want after that. Withdrawal from all the territories, only 15% agree with that, 77% oppose. And you can find out. I'll try to put a link to the PDF of this in the video notes. They agree that Jordan Valley is very important. 81% say it is important Israel retain sovereignty over the Jordan Valley. Okay, here's what I want to close with, just a couple minutes. And this is, I think, is prophetically significant too, because Israel faces enormous security threats on its northern borders right now. You have Hezbollah with its multiple rocket launchers and maybe 150,000 rockets. You have Hezbollah, who has been recognized by the president of Lebanon as part of their, essentially, army. This is a sea change. Now, I think the president of Lebanon realizes that that was a stupid thing. He's trying to walk it back because Israel came out and said, okay, if we get in a war with Lebanon or with Hezbollah in southern Lebanon, all of Lebanon is in our target zone. So now the president's trying to walk that back a little bit. I don't know that he could. Even the left-wing Forward, which you have to understand is a very left-wing publication, talks about Israel's next big war, and they talk about what's going on in Lebanon and Syria. Israel's next big war is almost certainly going to pit it against some combination of Iranian, Syrian, and Hezbollah forces along its northern borders with Syria and Lebanon. To be sure, an additional confrontation with Hamas and Gaza could be in the offing. But the forthcoming war in Israel's north, home to an estimated 1.2 million people, could be closer to the all-out war that the Jewish state has fought since 1973. The reasons have far less to do with the Arab-Israel conflict than with the ongoing civil war in Syria and the continuing confrontation between Iran, Persia, and Israel. The outcome could result in considerable destruction inside Israel. In fact, so much to the point that Israel has announced plans now that if there's a war that breaks out, they have plans to almost immediately evacuate 250,000 people from the north of Israel to secure places further south, because it's a very populated area now. It didn't used to be. But also in the strengthening of Israel's burgeoning strategic ties with its Sunni neighbors, Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, alongside their reservations on the Palestinian issue, share Israel's concern regarding Iran's aggressive regional ambitions. But they would all agree that Israel needs to settle with the Palestinians, the Arabs. They call them Palestinians. In this sense, a confrontation in Israel's north would decisively reflect current far-reaching changes in the Middle East strategic balance of power. It's going to be a problem. There's not much left of Syria. Just let me see if there's anything I want to share here. Well, the point of it is that this, and you can see the area of Hezbollah and ISIS and presence, and then ISIS has the area to the south of there along the Golan. This is a big deal, and this is it looks like war is coming. I mean, I just don't know how they avoid it. Even Breitbart was reporting on this the other day, that there's a significant potential for Israel-Hezbollah face-off, according to Arab intel officials. So all of this is prophesied. All of this is prophetic. And I think I'm done. So, I know, you don't believe it. So, look, we know this is coming. All the things are lining up exactly as the prophets prophesied. It's what we knew was going to happen in the Middle East. I think it's going to continue. I think we've gone past the tipping point at this point. I'm glad that Nikki Haley is a little bit optimistic that people are backing off a little bit, but all the other stuff I read say they're not. I mean, she says that, and then 2 days later, the Gulf Coast countries have a summit, and they say, Israel, give everything back to the 67 borders. So they haven't backed off. So maybe the Europeans are, but Europeans are, talk about end-time stupidity. I've said this before. All these migrants coming in that are military-age males, in history, invading armies used to provide their own transportation. Now Europe pays for them to get there and pays them when they're there. That's stupidity. And that's probably the most glaring example that I can think of today. So let's pray and let's go. Remember, our Redeemer lives. Lord, thanks so much for the promise of your word. Lord, we look forward to that day when you are back in charge and have set up your kingdom and ruling from Jerusalem. May that day come quickly, Lord. In Jesus' name, amen.